Hey, Mark.
Good morning.
How you
How
doing?
are you? I'm doing pretty well.
Good.
I'm gonna
Good.
get my chair moved up here.
All right.
I just got short.
Well, back at home.
Yeah. No, yeah, I'm at the lake now, but
Hmm. Yeah, but a familiar background.
a familiar background, yes.
Yep. Cool. Will's in the car and he's having
I see, Will.
technical some technical difficulties with his
I had
Bluetooth.
some, actually, I had trouble a little while ago, but the internet seems to be back now.
Mm.
I'm considering getting Starlink or whatever it is.
Mm.
Elon stuff for up north.
Yep. Hey, Tim.
Yeah.
Yeah, I got T-Mobile's 5G.
Oh, really? Yeah.
It's really just
So you don't, I
cell
mean,
service for my internet.
yeah, you have the same thing, whether it's your phone or your whatever.
Basically, yes. Occasionally, if I will still bounce over to my phone
Oh, through your phone, yeah.
if if my throughput really seems to tank on the
Huh.
5G. But I think that really is more about sharing it with
With
my
too many
parents
people.
who are both
Yeah, yeah,
also you know, on their computers in the other rooms
yeah, yeah,
and watching
yeah.
TV occasionally, which goes through that as well. So it's and probably occasionally the thing will needs to be reset,
Sure.
just to kind of bring it back up to speed and everything.
It's the
Uh,
old turn it off and turn it back on trick.
right, exactly. So yeah, so I've been preparing for school, which starts on Monday in um, in my
Oh,
local.
really? High school or college this month?
The
Both?
community college starts Monday.
Okay.
The high school actually has already started, but my dual enrollment classes in it don't start till the Tuesday after Labor Day. So I've met with
They're dual enrollment. That's the one that you don't have a test, right? I mean, you don't have to take a test
you don't
to
have to take the
qualify
AP
your
test, right?
course,
Yeah, you get
right?
it's a
Okay.
semester course spread over the entire year, but you do get three
Oh,
college credits or
credits.
units they call them here. And yeah, and so so that was an interesting.
I bet.
Well, I mean, so far I've only done it in the syllabus. Now I'll have to actually do it with the content, kind of spread it out and decide,
Okay.
sort of what I'm expanding and what and what I'm just kind of taking more time on or explaining it more, more slowly or whatever. It is the sort of porosity um, of the kind of the students that I have at, sort of between secondary and post-secondary has been really interesting the last couple of years because even in the
I bet.
Minnesota state system, at St. Paul College, which was mostly, well, it was about half in person, half uh, online asynchronous classes, and even there I was getting, and even at the outstate. Minnesota colleges, I was getting, 30 to 40% high school students doing PSEO,
Really?
yeah, doing,
What's
getting.
I don't know that acronym.
Oh,
What does that
PSEO, I'm sorry,
stand for?
PSEO it's a Minnesota acronym, post-secondary enrollment option.
Oh, okay.
It's where the
PSA.
state finances their tuition and pays for their books and all of that.
So are these students, you know, doing it to kind of get ahead when they can or to save
Mhm.
money or what?
Yes.
Getting the general out of the way?
Yeah, getting the first 2 years out of the way, and my
Right.
kids, my own children, actually did that, and my son, finished high school. He was kind of homeschooled,
Yeah.
so he didn't really physically go to high school, but he graduated high school with almost 60 credits.
Oh,
I think he probably had 60 credits. He didn't have all of the general ed requirements to
oh,
get the associate's degree, but that's kind of what a lot of students do, is they think that,
wow.
you know, now the question, of course, becomes, you know, are they really getting a college level experience and college level content? Um,
You mean content, or there's a whole different thing there? I mean, you're talking
well,
about
yeah,
peers,
both.
but not necessarily a distribution. Well, maybe you are online. That
Well,
might be.
it's weird though because you know, in Minnesota they had a requirement that you had to be in the top, you know, 25% of your class, you know,
Right,
based on GPA and all of that, in order to even qualify for you know, to get this tuition
right.
assistance from the state. Uh, in California, one of the things, you know, it's more of kind of an equity issue, and
Oh,
there are two high schools uh, in the little city that I live in, Woodland, and the new one, which is close to me and is actually immediately adjacent to the community college, is not the one that I'm going to be teaching at. I'm going to be teaching at
oh,
the older one on the north side of town, which is in a much more kind of working class neighborhood. Uh,
right,
and you know, and um, so it's going to be a different, you know, it's not going to be the children of, you know, professionals living
right.
in, you know, recent developments on the south side of town who all work in Davis, right? It's going to be, you know,
Sure,
people who work in the canning factory, right? Because this is where all the
right.
tomatoes get canned and all of that,
Hmm.
or that, you know, that sort of thing. And so that's going to be interesting, and
Sure,
they, you know, and the way that they understand it is that this is, you know, that starting to take, you know, college level courses is a way to sort of acclimate, you know,
sure,
these kids to, you know, to the idea that maybe they want to, you know, go on to the community college. And the community college, you know, system in California, of course, is sort of a gateway to the
right.
state college system, which is a gateway to the UC system. um,
Yeah,
so the, you know, so it's a different, it has a different purpose and function. Um, but I've never taught in a high school before, so this will be
well,
interesting.
in high school.
Yeah, so I'm
Well,
teaching.
I'm going to butt in there as a recipient of such
Mhm.
a problematic way of teaching um, by an awkward quirk. Um, Back at the age of 14, back then in the UK, we have to select which subjects we're going to do. And um, my school was 200 kids to the year. And within that, we made up 6 classes
Mhm.
stream from the best to the lowest.
Yep.
But not all subjects had 200 people wanting to do them.
Mhm.
There were certain English and maths, and because it was a Church of England school, you had to do divinity, as we call it, divinity.
Mhm.
And it was purely Protestant Bible side stuff. Um, and the way that the whole thing worked was it forced you by once you started making choices, your other option became limited. So you tended to be sort of science and tech
Yeah.
or very arty fast.
Well, that was the
Um,
sense I always got
I chose,
about British education, was that you get tracked very much earlier
yeah,
in
well, you
your
do, and once you get your what's known as the ordinary certificate, if you don't have the ordinary, it's very difficult to get the advanced one.
Mhm.
And the advanced one is what gets you into university.
Right.
So your ordinary one will get you into colleges, particularly back when we made a much more big distinction between colleges, polytechnics, and universities. There was a distinct hierarchy. You could also, at college, do an HNC or an HND, as in you could get the C being a certificate or the D being a diploma, which was a college version of the advanced level from schools. Anyway, so my school allowed me to do physics and chemistry, maths, engineering, drawing, geography and geology, and the fixed ones, plus German. Because that was the other thing, was like, it was pretty rare that you managed to wiggle out not doing one or other of the two foreign languages that our school taught. And at the end of my fourth year, so when I was 16 when I was 14 going on 15, before I got 15 going on 16, both geology teachers left. I'm not quite sure why. A male and female pair, and I don't think there was necessarily anything in that, but there you go. So me and 5 or 6 or so friends from the geology class, we strong-armed the school to allow us as non-adults to do an adult evening class in geology to maintain our knowledge.
To make up for what was lost. Yeah.
Such that they would allow us to then do the ordinary level exam when we were expecting to do it. But the only real downside to that deal, it turned out, was the geology group is a single class. So you've got people from all 6 layers of the stream, and the school decided that the geology class was a bit of a dump class, and it was pretty clear there was less than half the people there are actually interested in the geology. So therefore, it was noticed that all of us but one of the class was already not doing English literature, which in the UK is a bit poetical, Shakespeare and something. So I deliberately got away from doing English literature because I hate the analytical work you have to do for Shakespeare. And so I then got dumped into this class, which I've got 1 year to do a whole 2-year course, right? In something I wasn't particularly interested in, especially back then. So we went to this evening class, and it turned out that it was a 1 year not particularly aimed at the exam. And it was taught by a polytechnic lecturer. And the process, given that he wasn't necessarily the oldest person in the room, of teaching people who wanted to do the geology, came over as being quite different. So, and of course, at that point, there was no experience, no alteration, no explanation of, I do it differently than you do at school, blah, blah, blah. And I think it was the second or third homework thing that he'd set, which was every other week, not even every class, whereas we used to get homework every class. He set an essay, and he set an essay with, from memory, and particularly at the time, it was a right on this subject. And so I picked, fine, okay, it's a geological subject, did the essay out, but I gave it a title because it didn't actually explicitly say, and the title shall be type thing. And that got me the biggest uh, verbal spanking of that year because I didn't write down his relatively ad hoc, non-explicit, this is the title, no matter what you think. It's about whatever the subject was. I completely forget. Probably some might well have been right about one of the major five extinctions from memory. And it was, well, how is it right about one of the five extinctions type thing? How is that a good title? You know,
Mm-hmm.
especially when the five extinctions are actually got names,
Yeah.
right? And it was okay. And on the upside, I passed the exam, so I won two more. But it was an interesting look at you take a school kid who hasn't actually finished high school, stick him in an adult learning class, don't spoon feed everything. And then when he actually decides that, okay, you've told me write this, I'll write this, I'll give it a title, and that, for folks, whatever reason is wrong, or at least deserves a spanking.
Mm-hmm.
A public spanking, not
Mm.
just come and see me after class.
Right. Right.
And
Well, and that's kind of an interesting, from the perspective of the present too. I posted yesterday, I guess I made I'm putting together, well, the other thing that I'm learning is I'm learning how to use a new learning management system, Canvas, which is much more modern than the thing that I was using before, which was called Brightspace. And so, so I've been, hey, Chris. Um, so Will is in his car and he's sort of been in and out. He's having trouble kind of connecting.
Depends on the local cell tower he goes
Right,
by.
right. So yeah, so when he goes out of range, we lose him.
he
So
just needs to drive in a circle, not in a
yeah,
straight line.
right, or stand still, but he's probably got somewhere he needs to get. Um, so in any case, I was so I've been I made a welcome video. I posted it on YouTube, and I got a couple of people who responded to it in the comments and said, are you going to make the syllabus available? Are you going to, are we going to be able to watch your content, as you go through the semester, that sort of thing. And I've always in the back of my mind thought that maybe as a, I don't know, a retirement project or something someday, I would take this stuff and just sort of point it at the wider world, for lifelong learners or whatever. And and that, and so what you're saying, Tim, about, kind of, I mean, of the arbitrariness, of sort of the experience that you had, and then also, kind of the way that what I've been thinking about is the way that stuff gets packaged changes, right? If you're doing it for people who don't have a gun to their head, right? They're not sitting in a classroom and and there isn't, a grade at an accredited institution that's at stake, right? Then it seems like things need to be more interesting, right? At the very least, right?
Yeah,
To
yeah.
keep people engaged.
And the follow on from that was a little bit later. I was doing a professional day release course, which was converting a certain amount of advanced level education to a particular brand of engineering.
Mm-hmm.
And we had a range of teachers and also a range of ages of the students. A good majority of us were early 20s, starting career and all that. But a
Mm-hmm.
couple of the people were on the verge of retirement and they were doing it to get the piece of paper that allowed them to take that final sort of professional step to double their pension type thing.
Yeah.
But they weren't really learning anything.
Hmm.
And
They were checking a box.
although they might, yeah, yes, to a certain extent, they're checking a box. But they're also, the course was quite wide, but most people professionally were like 1/3 of the width of the course. And part of the course also was a relatively sneaky bit of academic math that was actually that, this is how you do addition, 2 + 2.
Mhm.
And the next thing you know is you're doing exponential for your homework type thing. So there wasn't quite a graduated ease you in. And the electrical guy was one of those people that still use the old Romeo stroke sugar paper type printing thing to do sheets of information. And his style was he would give you about 8 sheets of these sugar paper prints, and then he would read them to you in the lesson. And it's like, but to make sure that you played along, the thing was you had to put the missing word in occasionally.
Beautiful, beautiful. Well, I had a teacher actually in my master's program. I took an English history course, and the guy was, I mean, he would just get up to the lectern with a legal pad, a yellow legal pad, and just read off his legal pad and page after page after page, that he had handwritten. But it was good. I mean, sometimes it's it was useful information. So you never know.
Yeah. But on that particular instance, quite a bunch of us turned around and said, it's not acceptable. And of course, we're paying, it's hard money. So they have to listen.
Oh, yeah.
They have to listen a
Yes.
bit more.
Yeah.
And or more importantly, in my particular case, the company I was working for was paying. And it's
more so,
like,
yeah.
If it was as though I'm an aircraft manufacturer, I happen to be working for Boeing, and everybody else can
Right.
take a running jump,
Mhm.
as being little garage term. And that dovetailed quite nicely in some respects as the whole course. And it's a long day as well. It was like 8 in the morning till 8 at night, because you only do 30 odd weeks.
Wow.
Of 1 day a week.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And the oddball thing, it really did me a nice intro into ultimately going to university. Of course, the oddball one there was we also had to do law. And of course, the people teaching law are not the same type of people that are doing thermodynamics or heat transfer or design philosophy.
Right.
And it
whole different epistemology.
It took us 2 weeks to figure out that what we were really doing was we were part and parcel of an episode of the Paper Chase, whereby the teacher was actually trying to give us a story, and we were then from ground zero. I mean, you've got a bunch of engineers and architects. Why would you think we know anything about the actual physical process of making or writing law? And ultimately, we only really want to do enough to make sure we understand contracts, really.
Mm-hmm.
And it's like, so
right. You don't need to know about the origins of common law or the philosophy of
It
jurisprudence.
was literally his lesson was Mrs. Smith takes Mrs. Brown to the tea shop and orders, etc., etc. And basically the answer to the question is what happens next, and it's like, well, in the particular case he's talking about, it happens to be a legal case called Donahue and Stevenson, is where there's a bottle of ginger ale, and back then, it's 1920s, the bottle was a stoneware bottle.
I've vaguely heard of
So
this.
Mrs. Smith bought the food and drink. Mrs. Brown poured out a second glass of her ginger ale with a part decomposed snail plopped out of the bottle. And so this is where your duty of care comes from in your law as much as it does in ours.
Wow.
And we were just, okay, I'm going to put a pile of bricks up,
Yep.
walk away as an architectural engineer or whatever, and it falls over 25 years later.
Hmm.
If it's 24 and a half years later, I'm fucked.
Right.
If it's 20 years later, 25 years later, not. And it was, it was always given as though it's a seemingly artificial story.
Hmm.
Every one of them was just a sanitized summary of an actual case. Once you figured that out, it was like, okay,
Yeah.
did he give any clues about what next week's story is going to be about? Look it up.
Yep. Yep. Well, it's funny because there are so many of those kinds of a similar thing that I've been thinking about. I'm teaching. I'll be teaching a new course for the first time back in the Minnesota system this fall, beginning a week from Monday, and that's going to be American government in political science, and so that will be different from U.S. history, right? Although there's overlap, right? They want
Yeah.
they want some. I think they kind of want some stories to explain how we got the government that we got, but it seems to me that there's the the reading that I've done so far to sort of prepare myself for this suggests that it's much more in the nature of kind of just so stories that that kind of illustrate the exact points with a kind of a sense of inevitability in a way that that history doesn't necessarily kind of want to lean into. So there's kind of a different aspect to that, and I'm not 100% sure throughout the semester how I'm going to deal with that. The initial week's content that I've sort of prepared already, and I'll be doing it more or less, in real time, a little bit ahead, a week or two ahead of when I actually have to present it to the students. The basic stuff is sort of very much, this is what the theory says, and this is kind of the philosophical basis, and these are the definitions of terms, so that we're all talking, we're all using the same terminology in the same way to whatever extent we can. But also it's been interesting, that as I've been doing this, I've also been sort of continuing to read about sort of the ways that they want you to teach online asynchronous courses. And one of the elements of that is they don't like long lectures anymore. They want you to do micro lectures. And it's sort of like, okay, what's going on? So I'm thinking, well, okay, I can, there are some points that I want to make each week, and I can split them into, little, 10 to 15 minute things. I can't go down to the 6 to 10 minutes that they're asking for, but I can make a number of smaller chunks, for people to digest. But, at the same time, I'm also sort of thinking, well, what's the deal really? Because we have this, in the podcast world, we're seeing people doing, 2, 3, 4 hour long things. And and maybe and maybe the point of that is that people are just listening to that in the background and not really paying that much attention while they're folding their laundry or cleaning their house or whatever. And so it's just a kind of a noise, but but the signals seem to be coming in both directions as to sort of what it is that people want, and what they respond to and how they respond, and whether this sort of contributes. And everybody's got a theory about it, and the latest theory seems to be and Mark, you're laughing, so you can chime in on this, but the latest theory seems to be little digestible chunks.
Yeah. It is
Is that
interesting.
generational?
Well, that's exactly what I was going to say. I actually
Pendulum.
like a good lecture.
Yeah.
I you know you go to a conference. I used to, and you get a sense of the flavor of some of these ideas. And one that used to really drive me crazy was this pair share thing,
Hmm.
where so I'm going to listen to somebody who knows more about something than I do.
Yeah.
The last thing I want to do is talk to this idiot sitting beside me.
Hmm.
Just give me your thing. That's what I came to hear. I didn't want to talk to this guy and explore something.
Right.
You know, I can explore in my head. Give me something to explore.
Yeah.
And when you talk about, is this an age thing? That's exactly. I start to wonder about that. It's like all these little bits and pieces of things. I want to hear a story from somebody who can put it all together.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, and they're talking, and they've gone. I mean, it seems like kind of like a pendulum swung one way and then it swung the other, and now it's swinging back. I mean, because they're talking a lot about Bloom's taxonomy too, right? And they're talking, which is old, but they're talking about it in ways that also suggest to me that the disciplines that the leadership comes from has changed. Whereas in the past we might have had, the people who were leading these educational theory,
Right.
that were the idea leaders were from the humanities. Now
Yeah.
they seem to be from applied social science, right? So they're
Yeah.
talking about when they're talking about Bloom's taxonomy, they're talking about the higher levels, right, that are more about sort of integrating and analyzing and then turning towards a creative use. They're saying, well, so what we want you to do is we want you to have the students do something with the information.
Right.
So the examples that they're giving is, well, instead of having them write about how they would prepare a client assessment or a support plan in social work or something like that, have them make the plan. Well, that's all well and good in social work because those are the actual things, and student learning outcomes and all of that stuff, all of the objectives, sort of kind of fall into this thing too. It's sort of like, well, okay, experiential, active, vocational stuff makes sense in a certain type of a course or a class, right? But you know, as I'm sitting and listening to this, and I'm thinking, well, in history, I'm not training people to be historians. Even when I was at the university training history majors, I wasn't training them to be historians, right? Because it was a vanishingly small number of people, even who got history degrees, who would go on to grad school and actually become historians. They were going to do something else. They were going to become, high school teachers or lawyers or whatever. And so there's a mismatch there, right? And with this kind of vocational model of you should be able to go out and do the thing. um it makes sense when you're talking about being a registered nurse or being a social worker or being a or
Well, there is something to be said though that even if you're a teacher or a nurse or something else and you have to take a history class, even if your history professor spends a half an hour or one lecture of a whole section explaining what a historian is and what they do and how they do it, so that when you read those biographies 20 years later in your life, you understand what that historian is doing and
Hmm.
why and how they did it,
Hmm.
because that's a useful thing
Yeah.
to at least understand what that process looks like, even if you're never going to be a historian.
Right.
So you're
Um,
not just learning the facts, you're learning how people came to tell that story.
Right. And so my yeah, I think that's exactly right. And I'm glad you came
or
back.
even
I'm glad you came back, Will.
or even if you watch
I'm
how
glad I was able to figure out how to make Bluetooth work. Yes.
Cool.
or even if you watch how all the people in the since the pandemic who were so into things like Zettelcast and
Hmm.
like a big chunk of its history was historical method.
Yeah.
How do you do this thing to make history? But it's also applicable to,
Right.
50 other areas
Well,
to learn,
and yeah,
educate.
right. And that's why I'm leaning much more into the kind of reading, research, make notes, and write process, right? Although it's going to complicate my life tremendously, I'm sort of incorporating that into. I mean, I'm teaching 9 courses this fall, so I'm not going to do it in every single one, but in
So
some
the
in some of them.
complication is that you haven't got process.
What's that?
The complication being is you haven't got a fixed, well-practiced process.
Well, the complication
Yeah.
is I don't have TAs.
Right.
There you go. Although to go back, I have been watching uh things from the learning company makes a thing called the great courses as a
Yeah.
product.
Mm-hmm. I got my
Have university lectures come in and do usually 12, 24, maybe 36 lecture series. They do them with video and audio, but you have variations, so you can do, and usually they're half an hour.
Yep.
Um, and they have been a phenomenal product for decades.
Yeah.
The company sold 2 or 3 years back, and now it seems to be a weird little mini factory where they're doing pilot courses on a topic, and
Mm-hmm.
they seem to be watering things down, and it's not, you know, most of the stuff they had really, I think, was freshman, sophomore, and maybe junior level coursework
Right.
that's like intro into an area
Mm-hmm.
that's interesting and fascinating, and you can delve in, and it's great.
Right.
But it seems to have taken a turn that I would call the History Channel philosophy, where we're going to give you
Or
just the
even the
popular
PragerU.
stuff
Yeah.
now. It's going
Yeah.
to be Nazis and Hitler and sharks.
Yeah. Right.
You
Right.
Yeah.
know,
Or the PragerU thing, where it's gonna come from an ideology, right?
yeah.
And support a
But they've been
political
doing
position.
like I've seen a handful of little pilot things where we'll do one episode of what we think could be a course, and
Hmm.
we'll put it out on our streaming because they now have moved to streaming
Right.
as a thing versus this older lecture format thing
Yep.
they were doing. And we'll I think we'll put out one episode on, let's say, King Arthur
Hmm.
as a popular thing. And if enough people watch it, then okay, then we'll pay somebody to do the rest of the lectures in the series.
Yeah.
And it's like, just give me the old stuff you've been doing, tried and true for
Right.
40 years. And maybe there's only enough work a day people who want to see that, and the audience is limited. And okay, maybe that's
Uh-huh.
fine.
Yeah.
But it's kind of like in Hollywood, it's a Woody Allen movie. Any studio that makes a Woody Allen movie knows now exactly the entire size of the audience that's going to go see the Woody Allen movie.
Hmm.
No more,
Yeah.
no less. You're not it once in 30 years you may have a runaway crazy that breaks into the mainstream, but
Right.
it's those 2 million Woody Allen fans are going to go see the Woody Allen movie, and that's it.
Right.
And so you know exactly what that budget needs to be to make the money you need to make.
Hmm.
And most of the money you're making is because all the actors will do the Woody Allen movie for less because they want to, or at least they used to want to work with Woody Allen. I
Right. Yeah.
don't know where that is
Yeah.
now, but
Mhm.
it's here's what you're gonna make, and you know it to the penny.
Mhm.
Just do that thing. And
Right.
I'm guessing they don't. And then the other issue is, the attention span with TikTok and Instagram Reels has gone to zero. So that's why they want those 5-minute episodes, is that's as long as the attention you're going to get in for somebody who's watching at the airport, in
Mhm.
line at the grocery store,
Right.
folding their laundry,
Mhm.
you know.
Well,
What do you think that overall, there's like uh, a little bit too much of the uh, sort of data-based decision making. The okay, focusing on what's going to maximize engagement with the most people rather than actually really like it's sort of doing like the opposite of what you're talking about with the Woody Allen movies.
yeah. Yeah.
Rather than looking for, okay, I've found my audience. They're all this stuff, and it's even coming to pedagogy. The sort of online pedagogy. It's like, okay, well, the lowest common denominator. That's the only thing we're going to go after because that's the only thing we want to invest in.
Right.
I'm sure there are people, obviously, and there are audiences out there in education too, for people who actually do want to an hour and a half long lecture to make them think about something.
Yeah.
And again, there's definitely some people do just listen to podcasts. And probably one of them. I used to listen to Mark Maron's show, and it was in the background, but I was really listening. I
Mhm.
wasn't folding.
Yeah.
And just because those, yes, obviously there's a huge audience of these people who are TikTokers. They 30 seconds, so maybe a minute or two is much they're going to do. But that's not the only audience. And
Right.
I think that's sort of the false data-driven engagement thing of always searching for the biggest audience rather than looking for your audience, which is exactly the Woody Allen thing
Yeah.
that described. I don't know.
Right.
Or
Right.
even
Well,
the other good example too is Leo Laporte leaves a cable network because the cable network collapsed, and I think of Steve Allen and a few others were bankrolling it.
Yeah.
And they realized, okay, we're getting like 2 million people, and that's the most we're ever going to get. And Leo Laporte realizes when he leaves, hey, I can set up my own little podcast network and I can stream this. And because I'm a tech guy, I have the ability to buy the equipment and do it. And I know what the budget is, I know what we're going to make, and I can do 10 or 20 shows a week and engage an audience of 750,000 people, and that's all I need.
mhm.
I may have some new people come in, some old people leave, people are born, people die, but here's where I'm at, and this is a living. I can
Yeah.
make a living doing this.
Well,
And,
you can't anymore. It's $10 a month now.
well,
If you want the ad-free version.
Mm.
things shift along the way, but I'm happy to pay the ads because even in
Yes,
the
I
even in
like
a
the ads too.
even a space like that, the ads actually are reasonably valuable
Yeah,
because
they are. I mean, even
they
he
I'm
made
such a
that point
specific
originally, but
audience.
then yeah,
They're catered ads to me. Like
Mhm.
right,
they're
Yeah.
things I actually might be interested in getting or using.
Right.
yeah.
Um,
Well, and
but
I think
And that's
I
the
think
mistake
higher
that
ed
they've
has
been
that same
making.
issue.
Yeah.
They're only focusing on what's the biggest possible audience rather than those individual tailored small audiences. And maybe that's part of the sort of
Right.
grand idea we're getting of everybody has to be the biggest
Yeah.
rather than, I'm worried about, and I'm sure that, our friends in LA are particularly worried about, studio consolidation, you know,
Hmm.
that
Hmm.
nobody will try and serve individual audiences. That they could they could make a living with.
Right.
You could keep a small studio running, with your focused little thing, your focused audiences.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, I think
But
higher
no,
ed is
everybody
doing
has to
that
go
to some
more.
extent too.
Yeah,
Because higher ed, they have, on the one hand, they still a lot of institutions still have, kind of core requirements, but they're very sheepish about it. right? You have to take some humanities, you have to take some histories, that get in the way of you getting quickly through your STEM degree.
Well,
But on the other hand,
you need some level of ethics when you go to Stanford and you're in their accelerator program and you're going to create a crappy, if you're Mark Zuckerberg, you skip the rest of Harvard and you miss out on all the ethical stuff you really
Yeah.
needed to
right.
create that
Nobody at
multi-billion
Stanford
dollar,
is learning
you know,
ethics. Nobody at Stanford is
yeah,
learning ethics.
you
Yeah.
know,
Yeah. So there's, so they kind of, I mean, they want to, in a way, they want to have it both ways. They want to have their cake and eat it too, right? They want, to try to, they want to force people to do these things, but they also want to try to make them kind of interesting. So I kind of understand that a little bit. They want them, to not be as much kind of a slog. But the other thing, and especially, and again, to kind of go back to the change, that I'm seeing, because I'll be working, I'm going to be working in the high school, I'm still teaching these, I will be working full time in Minnesota, teaching online courses for, again, probably 60 to 70% college students, 30 to 40% high school students in each of the classes. But then I'll be teaching one course at the actual community college in person, and three in the high school. And I found out, when I met with the teachers beginning of this week, I found out that one of the classes, it's going to be a world history, and that's a sophomore class. And then the other two sections are going to be U.S. History 2, which is a junior level class. And so I'm going to be teaching kids that are much younger than even I'm used to, and so so that also kind of struck me as an opportunity or a challenge to kind of make this stuff accessible to them at their level of understanding, and their reading ability and all these other things, but also to try to make it interesting and to and I hope it will be, because it's stuff that interests me. So, so I will try to, kind of make it kind of more compelling for them. But and it was weird for me, because I asked them, I said, well, why did you choose to do two US twos and no US one? Because I have both. And it hadn't occurred to me. They said, well, US one is an eighth grade class. I was like, holy shit,
Oh,
that's it. That's it in their secondary education. They do U.S. History 1 in the eighth grade, and then they never return to it, right? And so in the 10th or the 11th grade, they do U.S. History 2. In the 10th grade, they do World or Western Civ. It's like, oh my God. And this is a thing that's been going on. I mean, I guess this has been going on forever, right? Because I took Western Civ in whatever it was, 1976, in the the in the 10th grade, I guess. And so it's since then.
oh.
yeah.
So you get technically, or what, with a college student, their last history course could have been when they were eighth graders, or what is
No, they would have
required?
had to. They would have had to have taken
Oh, it's a
U.S.
requirement.
Yeah, I think in California at least, and I think
Okay.
probably in Minnesota too. They would have had to have taken U.S. 2 in
Okay.
the 11th grade. So that
Okay.
could be
All
their
right.
last.
Okay,
That could be their
jeez.
last exposure, and their last exposure to world history could have been in their 10th grade Western Civ class.
Okay.
So is this why we have Iron Age Viking boats taking Matt Damon around the sirens instead of Greek sirens?
Yeah. Well, yeah. It
Because
was
you don't actually know fuck squat of anything.
no, no, but they're shallow in the water, so they can row them up rivers, right? So from an engineering perspective, it kind of makes sense. Um, yeah, no,
Yeah, except of course, Holmes was talking about pre-Bronze Age collapse.
well, yeah, exactly,
Viking,
right. So yeah, so we'd have to go to that boat that there's a 3,000-year-old shipwreck down in the um,
yeah.
you know down in the Mediterranean that they could have based that on.
Oddly enough, there's a Brit guy who does YouTube, and he's taken a back seat for a while. So he used to be quite more regular, but his channel called History, and it's let's take a film and see if it's actually ish. He fully accepts and fully understands that certain things need to be made dramatic for our film,
Yeah.
etc., etc., etc. Except blatant outright lies, as in things like, oh, U571 film, for instance, is where the US go and get an Enigma machine and a code book out of a submarine, out of a Nazi German. And they do it in like 1944, except the whole thing happened in 41 with the British destroyer doing the same thing. But also the big one that you did recently was on that newish film of Napoleon, where you see him going all the way from a fresh officer made in Corsica type thing all the way through the Waterloo. And it turns out that almost every fight scene, battle scene, is wrong. And the whole film seems to get the relationship with Josephine wrong. Anyway, but so he'd been told. This guy had been told for weeks and weeks and weeks he needs to do Napoleon. So he relented, and we were talking. In this conversation, we've talked about 10-minute type concentration ability. He went through every mistake, and his video about the movie is 15 minutes longer than the movie. It's I think it's his longest one ever, and it's close on 3 hours.
Yep.
But he did a quickie on the Odyssey, because it just getting requests on it, and his biggest problem is it's a story about a myth on a whole ecological panoply of gods.
Yeah.
And there's no gods in it.
Yeah. Well, apparently Elon Musk said he was gonna do a historically accurate Odyssey.
Absolutely.
to get past all of these race swaps that he didn't like in the woke version. And somebody responded to him, well, how are you going to do the historically accurate Cyclops?
Right. And there was a British classicist piped up and said, so we're going to do it accurately, are we? So you've got a 15-hour film.
Yeah, right.
Coming out.
Yeah.
Which I thought was quite good. But the
there wasn't a single line in iambic pentameter in there, by the way, not a single one.
Yeah.
And I mean, the people
but we get
too tall and not hairy enough.
Right.
Yeah,
but we get iambic pentameter in the West Wing.
Was like the people, short, brutish, and nasty, brutish, and short.
Yeah. Right. Yeah, Hobbes was right about the Greeks.
Ancient. It's just ancient people in general.
Okay.
Nothing special about the Greeks.
All right. In their state of nature. Yeah. Yeah. So
anyway.
So we've gone about an hour and we have not talked at all about why the West rules, which is fine
we
with
were
me.
sure.
Which is fine with me because I as I've been saying all along, I don't love this book for some reason. I mean, and it's kind of weird because I'll go to it and I'll look at pages and I'll think, oh, that's an interesting point. That's interesting. That's interesting. But overall, something about it just
I think
fails to grab me.
what's missing for me is he's got an interesting thesis about how he's going to measure this
Yeah,
stuff
exactly.
and do it over time.
Hmm.
And he's got another book, I think, where he really goes into more depth on how he did it and what happened and where.
Hmm.
Um, but he kind of throws this idea out and then he gives you a quick précis of history, which is, interesting.
And has some
And there's,
interesting little details in it, especially.
and there's some fun details, but it's almost like he's pouring a Zettelkasten out for us in
Hmm.
a
Yeah.
simple way.
Yeah.
But he's not always showing how his measurement kind of means something in individual time periods or on overarching time periods, what we really get out of this measure he's created.
Hmm.
And by showing us the history, here's what we can tell. Or if there are, it's like small little things that don't really add up to something big, as opposed to something like, and it's been, more than a decade now since I've read Colin Woodard's book, The American Nations, where he
Hmm.
takes this idea of America's really 11 different mini countries,
Right.
and here's how they've banded together over time. So he gives you he builds up and he gives you this thesis, and then he spends a chunk of the book looking back at sections of history to show you how you can now view US history from this new lens that he's created,
Right.
which is fascinating. And I feel like he could have added another 10 chapters
Hmm.
of that analysis with this new lens, and that would have been fascinating.
Hmm.
And Morris, as smart and as good a historian as he is, doesn't do that here,
Yeah.
which makes for kind of a lot of very dry history without
Yeah.
the extra
Yeah.
oomph.
Well, yeah, and the detail, I like the details, right? Like I've got up on my screen this page where he's talking about, he's sort of reiterating what he had already said in chapter 7 about the textile industry. In 1700, a spinster with a pedal-powered wheel needed 200 hours to produce a pound of yarn. By 1800, extraordinary devices with even more extraordinary names. Hargreaves's Jenny, Arkwright's Throstle, Crompton's Mule were doing the same work in 3 hours. Um,
Well,
okay, that's interesting.
part of
Those
the
are.
issue, I think, is his core thesis troubles me. Because he has a category comparison concept,
Mhm.
but the categories morph.
Yeah, yeah.
You got the East, which seems to me more fixed, and then the West keeps changing what the
Well, and
West
these
is.
interesting details don't really map to the
Right.
categories, and
Yeah.
don't, and and again, it's like what Tim was talking about with these sort of gesso stories, and as they're teaching legal legal concepts, right? That okay, these are interesting. Hargreaves's Jenny, Arkwright's Throstle. All these things are interesting little stories and would make good little 5-minute YouTube videos about this is what Arkwright's Throstle was, and this is why it was interesting when what's his name Samuel Slater stole it and brought it to Pawtucket, Rhode Island. Um, how does that, I mean, it's sort of like, when does the hand leave the wrist, when um
He's trying too hard to shoehorn his measurement index
mhm,
theory
yeah,
into actually what's a very interesting sort of comparative history.
yeah,
Um, yeah, yeah. So
yeah,
and as you're saying, sort of
Well, the
change and that it distracts from the actual comparative history. This shoehorning and how am I going to make the math work for my index,
mhm,
my
yeah,
developmental index.
the other thing missing too
It's
is
the usual story we have of like, we all wish he'd written a slightly different book. That's every one of these books. We wish they'd written a different.
yeah,
The
We
weird
can
thing
send him
too is
notes.
he's writing this book at a time where essentially we're at peak East versus West
Hmm.
like competition now because you know nationalism is on the rise and playing out in one sense while economic competition is playing out, and a lot of the stuff the West is getting is coming from the East
Right.
to help make the West's life better. But I don't know that he's getting into that. And I think there's an interesting turning point too, because prior to this, while there has always been some trade between the East and the
Right.
West, which he highlights and underlines all the way through, we're at a point now too where the East and the West are like eyeball to eyeball
Yeah.
in a
Yeah.
way they've never been.
Yeah.
And he has the ability to say, okay, where might we go? What might happen with the two up against each other?
Yeah. Yeah.
And there's kind of this implied promise of there's a winner somewhere.
Hmm.
Well, but
And
the
Or
interesting
we
most
can
thing
of his
predict the
is,
history
winner.
is
Yeah.
a
This
race between the
immediate
two.
issue that we've got. Yeah.
but the
Yeah,
book, interestingly though, the book is written, was it 2010, I mean?
yeah,
And it's like, okay, now this is going to happen, or this might happen, and I go, I know what happened.
Right.
The singularity changed into AI, and
Yeah. Right.
and it's
Right.
like,
Well, and I mean, and there seems to be, another way of kind of mapping this collision or this contest, right, is in the old-fashioned one of, free market economics, innovation, the profit motive versus some type of central planning, right?
yeah.
And and I think that would have been interesting in a way because there's you could draw some type of a line from sort of Confucianism to to the CCP, central planning of Mao and beyond even, um, and that would be interesting. That would be, that would have been, that would have been an interesting way of kind of, because when he talks, again later in this, again, I don't know what chapter it is I'm even looking at, but he talks about, his hometown, Stoke-on-Trent, the cradle of the Industrial Revolution. Which is interesting in and of itself, right? That he's picking, that this is kind of a one-off. I'm going to plant my flag here, um, but yeah, there's a gap between the interesting details that he dumped out of his Zettelkasten and the kind of the overall kind of
well,
thesis.
he doesn't. One of the other things I would have loved to have seen more of too is in the times where there were collapses within each of these spheres, what were the things that caused the collapses and what effect did that have on the amount of energy an individual person in those times was using
Hmm.
that could have been predicted beforehand? Or what are the subtle things in the history of those changes that might predict something like, if there is a collapse yet to come, and we're now that we're at a global scale, it's an even harder thing to pull out.
Hmm.
But what things could be happening within the East or the West that might cause a dramatic downshift in overall output versus, you know, how you rebuild those societies later on,
Hmm.
Well,
Yeah.
or how
he
they
has a
historically
concept
have
that
been rebuilt.
There's a concept in, basically the very end chapters about tinkering, 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 and then it's not good enough. There'll be some giant calamity
Oh.
that the world faces, and then that's the time for innovation. So if you translate that into what that might be, yeah, I mean climate change would be, it's going to require massive change in the way people think and do things, and it's not going to happen through. We're not going to get there. I mean, that was an interesting idea. I wish, looking back, I was trying to think, well, because he did talk about the decline that would occur. What happened, and then
Hmm.
how do you pull out of it?
Hmm. Yeah. Well,
He's got this thing about tinkering, and what kind of parameters lead to these to a massive innovation
yeah.
when tinkering is wrong, and can it happen? Is it more likely to happen? To me, I start to see, well, here, that's what I would have written about. Is it
Yeah.
going to happen in China where you've got kind of the government being able to marshal, like you say, here's what we're going to do. We're going to make this giant change. We're only going to have one kid per family or whatever, because, whatever,
Right.
that's a massive change.
Yeah.
And you're not going to get away with that in the US where you have more capitalistic. Well, we'll see what ideas win, which
Well,
is very different.
yeah, and I think that the whole, I mean, to kind of connect that, Mark, with what Chris was saying, there's this whole idea of especially why the East declines, I think, is not well explained, right? And there's, and there are seven, there's several. I was going to say, I didn't know why I just said seven. Freudian slip, I guess. There are several, moments when the East sort of declines, right? The Ming sort of, and the way that we tell the story is that, later Ming dynasty rulers become more, they sort of become isolated within the Forbidden City, and they become more interested in, their collections of antiquities and their archaeology projects and this and that and calligraphy and their concubines or whatever, and they sort of lose sight. And I don't think that that's entirely accurate, right? But what causes, what can you attribute, these kind of cycles in Chinese? Because there is, I mean, there's this collective action kind of imperative, right, in Confucianism, right, that you're supposed to be focused on um, what benefits the society, right, and the biggest, always the biggest example for me of that is and the biggest indication that you've lost the mandate of heaven is always, in my mind, the silting up of the irrigation network, right? And the locks and dams break down, and the canal, the Grand Canal, becomes impassable, and all of that, and that's always, and that leads to famine, and then social chaos ensues, and there's a change in dynasty. The Mongols come in, or the Manchus come in, or whatever, or I mean, and the Ming, Hong Wu, Zhu Yangchuan, actually was a peasant who had been, his family had starved during the famine after the plague in the 1330s. And so how does that happen? Is there a bigger story about, kind of societies, and the growth of a scholar gentry that begins to focus on its own advancement at the expense of actually doing the Confucian thing, and because there is some indication also that they, that as that there's a connection between sort of the corruption of the Confucian examination process several times in Chinese history and these bad results, right? So when these gentry families start paying scholars to take the exams for their sons, and then you start getting this
Yeah.
bunch, this large batch of um, of regional leaders, magistrates, and even imperial administrators who not only don't know, haven't been educated because they had somebody else to take the exam for them, and also haven't absorbed the Confucian ideal at all because they weren't trained in it, right? So they have no sense of anything more important than their own, not necessarily personal, but certainly family status, and and family continuity, and wealth and power, which I guess has its echoes in today. So maybe that's why it interests
Yeah.
me.
Well, or what happens if you overlay ideas like, the fourth turning, where
Yeah.
you have like 80-year spans of
Yep.
history that shift? How does that overlay on his overarching thesis?
Right.
And
Interesting.
does that play out in China over time as well as it does in American history? Or even things like
China
you
might
know,
actually be a better test of it because there's more continuity over time.
yeah.
There's more
Or
generations you can trace.
you have things in American history, especially with the imposition of the Industrial Revolution. Eventually, in the early 1900s, we start looking at business cycles and what those look like and how we can even them out so that the fluctuations don't cause problems with the economy now the way they did, and
Mhm.
things that end up creating massive downturns or, you know, Black Mondays, Black Fridays, that this week, it seems like there's a black something every 10 years now instead of every 40 or 50 or 80.
Yeah.
But how do you have and then what do you do in an administration where you have all these people who are planning something for societal change, like the Heritage Foundation, who have a plan and they've got somebody at the helm who's ostensibly trying to help them carry out that plan, but who also is just going to like throw in wrenches and like, oh, let's do this tariff thing, which throws all the business cycles off everywhere. No business person on the planet is a fan of any of what this administration has done. It's helped some of the uber rich out in some sense, but eh,
Well, it's helped a lot of
from a
grifters. Yeah.
for a planning perspective and for a continuity and building your society up, there is no long-term plan for what Trump is doing now with tariffs for where that puts us 20 years from now.
Mhm.
Nobody's even making an attempt to try and guess at what that looks like or to say, hey, we want to go from here to here and this is what it is. It just,
Well,
it's this that silting up of all the stuff.
yeah.
But we really don't know other than we may be way down here 20 years from now as a result.
Well, I think a part of that has to do with there's no focus on actually creating anything or actually producing value. It's really the name of the game, and the path to success has been in figuring out where to extract rents.
Yeah. Well, and even in the planning thing, he's like, oh, we're going to bring manufacturing back to America, which potentially could be a good thing from the perspective of the East and the West being eyeball to eyeball. Like, yeah,
Mhm.
having the ability, if there were a world war,
But
America
you're
would be in
Or at
horrible
least,
trouble because we can't manufacture any of the
right.
stuff we need because it's all being made overseas.
Or if nothing else, having shared interests and and
well
and
with
shared experience, and say, so that we can't say, well, you know, China, your industry is dirty. Well, all industry is dirty. The only reason we can say that our industry is less dirty is that we've farmed out all of the dirty shit to somewhere else.
there's two things I would say on that at the moment is all this wonderful new high tech innovation that's coming out of the US is all now going to be steam driven catapults on new carriers that you haven't got because apparently magnets don't work when they're wet. Um, and that other really good southern good boy uh, Dustin, whatever his surname is, from um, Getting Smarter Every Day, was trying to build something simple, literally a brush for your barbecue that didn't have a brush so that it didn't drop the hairs of the brush into the barbecue and that then came back into your food, because quite a few people apparently have been eating wire brush bristles and getting quite bad throat injuries from
Mm.
them.
I could,
A year ago,
they would tend to be kind of
he
sharp, I
was
think,
trying to
but
make it purely from American-made components and couldn't. So I wonder how you local tax dodging tea terrorists think you're going to do it. No, other than you just need to do as Trump seemed to do when little.
yeah, I mean, the
I
problem,
was
I
about
think
to
part of the
say
problem
Prince
is there was
Charles.
never really any interest in doing it. It was just about talking about doing it.
Yeah, but at the moment you've got somebody who talks about grabbing pussy and all the rest of it, and he's still in power, right? But apparently you want to look after all your women. I I heard a good joke about that, about why innovation um, doesn't always follow the correct pattern.
Mm.
And I had uh, a woman send me a meme joke that was along the lines of, if we want to improve the mammogram, because it's not an easy thing to do, and women are often in some significant pain when they have to go for this medical treatment,
Hmm.
is it's simple. You just find that somehow to have a testicular equivalent and the innovation will come fast.
Very fast. Yeah. Yep. Yep.
To which I then responded, it just shows you how ruthless women are. At which point I then got a long list of women-driven innovations, but
Mm.
including the Wi-Fi, etc., etc., etc.
Right. Wi-Fi.
But no, I, we've the stuff with either this book or other books, and or things that we've touched on the periphery of. At the moment, I still can't see a proper explanation of what seems to happen when an innovation happens or a disaster happens. I mean, 10 minutes ago or so, we were talking about Odysseus, and it's a Bronze Age collapse story, and we don't even now we don't seem to know what happened very well, other than this, we just blame the sea people.
Hmm.
But
But were the sea people, were they conquerors or refugees? We don't know.
we don't know. And
Well, you don't know because it's all about me, 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 right? We're not really that concerned about who they were and where they came from, only the effect that they had on us being the Egyptians who wrote the account of the invasion.
I have seen a few reviewers like make the connection that what Christopher Nolan's really trying to say is some of what's happening to Odysseus is the enemy is inside the house is the story. And how does he, especially when he gets back, how does he get rid of the enemy that's inside the house that's caused this war, that's taken him away, made this crazy trip back, and now he's back at home, and how do you get rid of it? And how do we then apply that thesis to what's happening in America now, where both the right and the left think there is an enemy in the house, and how do we deal with it?
Yeah. Yeah.
You know,
Well, and to whatever extent, I mean, there's a lot of, it has nothing, it's kind of weird because it has nothing to do really with the poem, right? But the sort of the meta, potential meta conversation or history around, that we think we understand about what was going on in in Wilusa, right, which was Ilium, maybe, was that it was sort of it was an important little city state, but it was caught between the Hittites and the Greeks, right? And so it was this place where this imperial conflict and confrontation happened, uh, and um, and that has a lot of resonance for the moment too. I'm not sure that the way of that the way of examining that is making another movie about the Odyssey, but whatever, he did it. He
and he made some money doing it,
made some money doing
and
it. Yeah.
he'll make another.
Yep. Yep.
And
So
the Odyssey is everywhere now. I feel bad for the 10th or 11th graders who are, you know, stuck reading it in this
mhm.
environment.
Yep. Yep. I heard I only saw a headline or a thumbnail, so it may be completely bogus, but I got an impression from something that I saw that Emily Wilson didn't like it.
Yeah, there's she's taken some flack because, like since this woman who spent more than a decade like reading and reinterpreting it with literally the the best linguistic and historical perspective that's ever been available in human history.
Oh, you mean
Like,
it wasn't just woke?
I just, you
Yeah.
know,
Yeah.
her sister, who is a foodie and a food writer, is probably having a better go of it, lately within, the food world. Um, and
Yeah.
I feel bad for her because her translation actually is pretty phenomenal.
hmm
You know,
Yeah, I have it on my shelf. I read slash listened to um the Iliad, and then I was starting on the Odyssey. I don't think I've gotten through the Odyssey yet. But it did seem to be and the essay that she sort of wrote about the translation I thought was really interesting as well. Um,
yeah,
because I mean because we hear all kinds of just sort of weird, dumb things about, you know, they didn't they couldn't recognize the color blue and shit like that.
yeah.
Um, it just become part of sort of urban legend.
Well, and that's not urban legend. Like literally, the leader of England was the one
Right.
who
Yeah.
wrote the original essay,
Yeah.
like
Yeah.
about blue in the Iliad and the Odyssey, like or in
hmm
Homer.
Yeah.
And it's like I want to know why we can't have a president who's literally on the side writing these academic articles about like the subtle linguistics of whether we see
Well,
colors or not colors in 2000,
yeah.
8,000-year-old
Right.
manuscripts.
We had Teddy Roosevelt, but how much good did that do us? I mean, and Woodrow Wilson was smart, but Jesus.
Yeah, well, and I always like to. I actually sat at Wilson's seat at the lecture table at Hopkins where he was getting his PhD, and he carved his name into the drawer,
Mm,
you know.
yeah.
And if you have a lecture class in that room, like everybody wants to at least take one turn sitting at that
Sitting at
seat.
the Wilson seat. Wow. Interesting. Interesting. So, yeah. So do so just to jump off topic for a minute, we were gonna do this next. Do we still want to do this, or do we want to do the two fourth turning books?
What?
In the chat, Chris said he'd be.
You
I
lost
said
Mark
should we
there.
do the fourth turning, and Chris said he'd be interested in doing them both because there's a fourth turning book and then prediction book, and then there's the fourth turning has arrived. Um, which again, the fourth turning strikes me as, I was thinking about it before you mentioned it, Chris, because it strikes me as sort of not. I'm less frustrated by the fourth turning than I am by this Morris book, but it strikes me as similar, right? It's a big thesis that is kind of supported by anecdote, by cherry picked anecdote. But it's an interesting thesis, at least.
Yeah. Or queue it up in line for whatever is next after.
Okay.
I can I can go either way. I mean,
Yeah.
even if the fourth turning is here, it's I don't think it's going to turn
It's gonna take
before I
80,
finish
it's going
the
to take
book.
80 years. Yeah. Yeah. Okay. Well, we can put it in the queue then and read Worldly Goods next, which actually I will have to physically read because I was not able. She seems to not have done a good job in attracting audiobook readers or people wanting to narrate her audiobooks or something, or a
Yeah. I
publisher.
wondered if it was just me or what the story was because I didn't see one either, and I was like, oh geez, like
No. There
so,
aren't
and
there aren't many for. I mean, she's written a lot, and there aren't a lot of them out there.
I've gotten really used to kind of power reading through with the audiobook first and then going through and doing heavier annotations and
Mhm.
notes as we read things, and I was
Yeah.
like, so this one's gonna totally throw my reading you know
Mhm.
schedule off.
It only costs $7 though.
Right, right. So it had that going for it.
Oh no,
And that evidently was for postage as well. So
I I found my copy at the used bookstore down the way,
Oh,
a
nice.
while back, and I got it for $2.
Wow. Wow.
okay, so seven
No
I got
shipping
it was
involved.
Yeah, I got mine
I
used,
got
but
two.
I think it was probably more in your neighborhood, Mark, than yours, Chris. So he jumping back to our buddy here. He returns to science fiction. I did notice the Dalek in the photograph, um, which I thought was a nice little British moment. Um,
He quotes Tom Friedman toward the end too.
he quotes Humphrey. He quotes and Isaac Asimov in Nightfall. Although if we're
I
gonna
guess they're
do,
not both. It depends what you think of Friedman's writing,
yeah,
whether that's science fiction or
yeah, right, exactly,
not.
exactly. Well, Friedman, I don't know. Friedman. I guess I would categorize now with like Fukuyama. Um, the world is flat and history has ended.
Yeah, that's
Um,
right.
but Asimov's Nightfall and his Foundation, which I guess is current as well, right? Because there's an Apple TV Foundation series which seems to have gone off the rails of the actual story a little bit, but Arthur C. Clarke wrote a fun novella that also I think was released as a short story called Against the Fall of Night, I think it was called. And it was about the far future where there are these two um, almost, I hadn't thought about it, but almost like the Eloi and the Morlocks, there are these two cultures. One of them lives in this last city on Earth, and they think they're the last people, and then the other one is a much more kind of a rural thing, um, and they come together, and it's kind of almost a coming of age story of this young guy, although because he's immortal, he's hundreds of years old, but he's still a kid um, in the story, and that might have been a different, that might have given him a different metaphor, I guess, for this, because it's very much that the Arthur Clarke story is very much about sort of nostalgia for lost kind of high civilization, kind of looking at it from the perspective of we're living amongst these technological marvels, but we can't make them. We don't know how they were made, sort of thing, which apparently was something that happened several times in history, right? They, in the in the Middle Ages, people didn't understand how, sort of the Romans had done what they did, in, in even in Native American history, right? They, the walls at, Sacsayhuaman in Peru, the later indigenous people who lived there had no idea, if they were made by giants, right? And the Cyclopean walls in Greece, right, made by the Cyclops, right? Because, nobody could figure out how the Mycenaeans were able to, pile stones. Um, the pyramids, all these things that, that we have to sort of posit some, Eric von Daniken aliens coming and doing it for us because we've lost the knowledge. I mean, that's an interesting sort of cyclical pattern that Morris kind of waves at as he's going by it, but doesn't really address.
Well, even with like advanced engineering, it's only been within the last decade, I think, that modern engineers have figured out how the Egyptians moved heavy blocks across sand
Hmm.
to
Yeah.
get them there. And it's still a kind of an open question how the Saracen stones at Stonehenge got moved from the Preseli Hills to Southwest Wales. Like,
Right.
people are still wondering, how the hell did they pull that off with, it's
And it's
easily,
not a very flat route either.
oh
Yeah.
no. Well, that's the tough part is it's like you got to mine it out of the Preseli Hills, but then you got to get it out of the Preseli Hills.
Right.
And even with modern technique, it's not a simple engineering feat, much less how do you do it with the technology that would have been available at the time, which
Hmm.
is
Yeah.
not much,
Right.
you know.
Right. Right.
So
And
it has to have been aliens. Has to have been.
has to have been well, I mean, and then, I mean, going back even further, I mean, going back to, the dawn of everything and the Göbekli Tepe, Karahan Tepe, people who weren't even, an agricultural culture, the level of motivation that is required to do something like that, to build, and just this sort of these multi-generational projects. Um, Although, yeah, I mean, really, there are, there's the cathedral at Cologne too that took 500 years to build. Um, so there, it's not. I guess it's not
I mean, I mean,
unknown.
even something at the other end of Stonehenge, but in terms of a ley line, there's a place called Avebury,
Hmm.
which is mostly earthworks,
Right.
but there's a modern village that cuts through the circle
Yeah.
of the earthworks, and these sort of people have the odd stone in their garden, and it's um, the bulk of these stones are like 20, 25 foot high, big lumpy ones. They're not like squared up for
Hmm.
building the arches.
Right.
And the even just the earthworks, it's like, okay, let's do it with modern shovels. A person with a modern shovel. And it's like, okay, if you got 200 people doing it for like 20 weeks of a year, how many years does it take? And it's like it would take 1,000 years or something stupid. Um, and so there must be more people because it's clearly not taking 1,000 years to build them. The sheer numbers of these instances show, I think, the fallacy of this is empty land and it's clearly not farmed, etc. Excuse for Spanish and the Puritan invaders of your place. The sheer changes that are imposed when something like that happens, they're all relatively well known now. But we then talk about, when the Visigoths came down and collapsed the Western Roman Empire, we don't seem to follow it through in quite the same way. And there was going back to your Robert Reich book on the gene DNA technology, something that I hadn't come across before was whoever these people were that were first sources, and they changed the way we followed and became pastoralists that came out of the Caucasus area.
Yeah.
That are now Celtic bloodline and all this.
Well, they completely replaced apparently the people who actually built
Yeah.
the main rings of Stonehenge. Yeah.
Yeah. And so we're now talking about these events as though they are a whole story, everything and nothing but the story. Yet almost every time we say that, at some level, somebody comes along and says, what about one of those? And it's like, well, that's not inside the story. And the next thing we know is the whole thing goes open again, and there's another bunch of whatever it happens to be. And one that I always think of is as being funny, not quite hard, but close, is, we've thrown up the James Watt telescope, space telescope, and what Hubble saw is basically fucking of nothing compared to the James Webb one now is, and it's looking at different wavelengths that allow it to see even further back.
Into the infrared, yeah.
And coming back to Rita's conversation for that about climate change, being involved in that quite heavily, and the actual ignorance as opposed to the ideologically driven of how glass actually works for the greenhouse effect type thing.
Oh, locked up. Well, while we're waiting for Tim to come back, one of the things that strikes me is population, right? As I was kind of scrolling forward through in the Kindle on my screen, I passed by that arc of danger map, right? And it's in the climate change thing that Tim was going to get to, I think, just now, and that's one of the elements. Ooh, he really went. That's one of the things I think that is interesting about this, kind of this east-west thing, is is just the population density and and just the size of these, these populations, and that's a factor as well. Hey, Tim, you're back.
Sorry, you have to re-log in every 2 hours.
Oh, okay.
Sorry. Even though we use greenhouse effect as a metaphor, really, most people don't know how the greenhouse works, let alone the greenhouse effect. And I find that troubling. And the other thing that's recently happening in the UK, of course, is we're now in our fifth heat wave, although my local weather forecast for next week is there's a bit of rain every day of the week.
Mm.
Is the more ideological driven response that the wildfires that we're now suffering a bit like Chris had his big one. We lost Stourbridge up in the Midlands, right, where not far from where you were talking about the Industrial Revolution stuff. A field wildfire jumped to a golf course and carried on across the road and back again and took out 10 houses before we managed to get it under control. And that's in green and pleasant land, England type thing. Except other than the odd tree, there is no green around here anymore. It does worry me that the same way as Columbus was trying to get to China or India and happened to bump into the Americas back then, the things we don't know that are really going to bite us. And that, we've come up with that in a number of different places. And there's been a number of other oddball type, what do we do to get out of it? And we've spoken about Lewis Dartnell's book of how to restart the world when it collapsed. And he just, he does a science fiction premise of, let's just say 90% of people just disappear. And therefore the 10% that's left can't run the current civilization.
That's
We're too dispersed, we don't know enough. Make me a pencil.
Yeah.
And make me a pencil, etc., etc.
Or deliver my dinner.
And well, yeah. I mean, who's going to delivery do my dinner? So that is somewhat concerning, as in what's the pain of the collapse on a global scale, because we've never had, humans-wise, we've never had that. Of course, dinosaurs went for it, but we haven't yet. The Bronze Age collapse might have well been a pretty big collapse, but compared to all those poor people in Australia, they probably didn't even see the echo. So
yeah, well, and the Bronze Age collapse is, I mean, that's still very, kind of Euro Mediterranean centric, right? Because China was doing just fine, and India was in pretty good shape while the Bronze Age was collapsing. But to go back to the population thing, I went off on a little tangent about population while you were coming back, Tim, and and to connect that with the very end of the book with the kind of the Kurzweil singularity and this merger of and I've been sort of, I don't know, I've been hating on Kurzweil ever since like the year 2000 when that Why the Future Doesn't Need Us article hit Wired magazine that Bill Joy wrote, because he takes down Kurzweil very effectively in that, I thought. But in any case, the thing that always struck me about Kurzweil is that this whole merger of humanity with technology that he's suggesting is moments away. It's always just right over the next hill. How many of humanity get to participate in this, and what happens to everybody else is really kind of, I think, is the most pressing question for anybody who wants to write a science fiction treatment for a screenplay right now. I mean, and Elysium, I guess, addressed that a little bit, but we need an update of that. Or you're echoing a lot. I can't really hear you. Now I can't hear you at all.
Muted altogether.
Yeah. So I think that's I mean, that idea of kind of the population stakes of this, because again, I mean, in a way, um, there's a we're still talking about, I mean, Morris is still kind of talking about the the elite and not really addressing, kind of people. The reason that that arc of danger or whatever he calls it in that map is where it is, with climate change, is because of the population, right? Here it is. I just was scrolling back to page whatever this is, 752 on my, I don't know, somehow on my Kindle. But that probably has to do with how that seems to expand and contract depending on how big your Kindle page is. But this arc of instability, right? What makes that an arc of instability is the population, the number of people living there. I mean, if the Ganges Delta dries up or floods, because sea level is rising or because the glaciers in the Himalayas are getting tapped out, that's hundreds of millions of people who are going to be displaced. What is this? Fires in Southern California. Yeah. It's cool here today in Northern California. It was in the mid 50s when I woke up.
I have a friend of mine who visited me in piped up that look, it's only 55 in the morning, and she's sort of central but higher, well, 1,500 feet, but not that high, really. Um, and I thought, it's August, summer's over.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And then the following day, we had 10 sets of houses burned up in the wild.
Yeah.
Although I must admit, I'm refusing to use writing for the wildfire. Human fire is a single word, but it's capital well.
Mm. We've gone from the hundreds Fahrenheit last week to the 80s this week. So it seems like we're changing seasons.
But on a similar vein, I was talking, oddly enough, with a person I was talking about just now, mid-level California. As and when technology change, you don't always hear about the Luddite half, as it were. What happened to all those people, that technology, all that skill that used to make all of the wooden horses and car type stuff when the car came
Buggy
along.
Whip Factory.
And it became the slowness, I suppose, and the elites with their sports and the non-elites with their sports element of those trailing bits of technology keep something alive, etc., etc.
Mm-hmm.
But everybody drives a car. And most few people that choose not to drive, probably riding a decent Dutch-driven type electric bike or pedal bike even. It's better than on your own horse or on a foot.
My bike has no electronics.
What's next? How does it break next?
Yeah. Well, and
what's
the
pain about break? I'm still thinking that that there's an element of going back through, say, the Ostraces and Conway book, The Big Myth, on each of those big steps where relatively modern big business, who has such a scale, those responses are different. They protect them very well. We've got a new technology, solar and wind. We can replace fossil fuels if we'd have done it more sensibly 25, 30 years ago. We would be probably on the verge of saying we don't need any.
We'd be well ahead. Yeah. Yeah.
Well,
One of the
well,
one of the other
worldwide.
things that one of the other things that strikes me though is kind of the problem of Adam Smith's pin maker, right? Adam Smith is quoted as having said, and I don't know exactly where he's quoted as having said it, that what can you expect from a man who spends his entire working life putting heads on pins, um, and that's a judgment about sort of the quality of life, the quality of of that person's intellectual experience, ability to understand, value in society, all of these things, right? That strike me as really relevant when we're talking about kind of what's going to happen to large numbers of people. That it's really difficult to get past. I mean, I was watching that. I've been watching The Expanse with my parents in the evenings. We'll watch a couple of episodes on Prime, and because there are like 5 or 6 or 7 seasons, and and in that's a science fiction set a couple hundred years in the future where there's Earth, there's Mars, and there's the belt, the asteroid belt, and the Outer Planets Alliance, right? And to a great extent, the Belters are shit. They're sort of the scum of the earth. They're dirty. They're ignorant. They've got all of the worst vices. Some of them are very noble and good and heroic and everything, but for the most part, they're not admirable people, right? And that kind of stuck with me and sort of resonated as well, right? So who are we concerned about when we're kind of following along with Morris, right? And the other thing that I've been doing recently is I've been scanning a bunch, just hundreds and hundreds of photographs that my parents had that I no longer had of sort of my earlier life, and especially my life between the 80s and around the year 2002, 2003 with my late wife, right? Yeah, we're sticking with Lisa's book, and why don't we read?
Well, that's a good question.
What was that? What was that? Table of contents. Oh, it's all her list of plates. There it is. The prologue and the first two chapters, or the first prologue and the first chapter would take us about 90 pages. So why don't we do that? Yeah, why don't we do prologue and first chapter? All right. So the point I was going to make is, so I've been scanning all these photographs, and sort of reclaiming this 16 years or so of my life when I was with this wife that died, and the thing that struck me is I'm not anybody important in any of these pictures, right? I'm not this is before, this is when I was just a salesman for Silicon Graphics, so I was not a scholar. I had no, I had nothing to contribute. I didn't have a book or anything like that. And so I was sort of effectively kind of a a non-person, but it didn't matter because I was a boyfriend and a husband and a father in these pictures, right? And the things that I recognize about her and about my kids is not that they were, that not that she was, a rising executive with Norwest as it was merging and becoming Wells Fargo, but that that she was my girlfriend and my wife, and and the mother of my kids. Um, and that's been sort of sticking with me, or that's been sort of in my mind as I've been sort of reading about these, about this, is the West on top or is the East on top, and what does it matter, and for whom
Yeah.
does it matter, and what are the consequences for, kind of for regular people of that question? Because the
But
other,
that's also why collective action is so difficult to mobilize, right?
Mhm, yeah,
Because everybody is satisfied in their own little cocoon of a life,
right, yeah, and
and
in
they
that in that
don't. Yeah.
Yeah, and in the beginning of that, I think it's the last chapter, chapter 12, right on the second page of chapter 12, and I won't give you the page number because it varies on my Kindle. But there's this graph that shows the East and the West rising from 1700 through 2100, and you've got the East overtaking. Um, as the curve kind of goes exponential, right? The East overtakes the West, and the social development score goes from something like 4,000 in, it's 2,000 now, 4,000 or 4,000 ish in 2050, and by 2100, 10,000, right? He says, and maybe 10,050 in for the East, which is going to pass us, and 9,050 for the. See you later, Tim. And 9,050 for the West. Um, Again, if we're starting from a 0 point around between 1850 and 1900, you know what how meaningful is this difference between 9,050 and 10,050, and why should we care? I guess that's my last word on art.
Well, it is curious, like, and it's roughly, I don't know, that jump is roughly concomitant with the Industrial Revolution, and it's hockey sticking up, but how long does that hockey stick up for
Yeah. Well, yeah, I mean,
before?
given ecological collapse, but even the one that he mentioned many chapters ago with the Industrial Revolution, right? And what happened in the end of the 18th and through the 19th century. If we're increasing by orders of magnitude both in the East and the West, then is the most relevant question which one is slightly higher? If both have
Yeah.
increased by orders of
Well,
magnitude.
and that's the thing, is we're so close together, and globalization has brought us, is there no distinction between East and West other than
Yeah, is
the
it even meaningful? Yeah.
the kind of the geopolitical boogeyman benefit that the leaders of the East and the West get out of pitting themselves against each other?
Right.
Because in some sense, you know, we're, super technological the United States is fighting against, you know, they're not Stone Age, let's say Bronze Age Iran right now. And we're being held hostage because we can't control the strait through
A
which
piece of water. Yeah.
all this stuff travels. And you got to wonder, we're really over a barrel geopolitically because of this one little wonky thing that,
Mhm.
and it's not only that, but it's been in the news for months now.
Mhm.
And it's like,
I heard,
And
I
when
heard
I
a
compare
statistic.
that by looking to this thing, it's like here's this people at the top end of this, and you
Yeah.
know,
Yep.
we can
I
have
heard
a
a,
nice long smooth growth phase, but
I heard a statistic in the last couple of days that said that from decision that you want it to delivery of a THAAD missile is 53 months.
Yeah.
So, I mean, I won't. I mean, the technological difference. Let's not say Stone Age or Bronze Age. Let's say World War II level of
Right.
technological sophistication
yeah.
versus whatever it is that we want to say the U.S. is at now has implications, right? For be for top at least top heaviness, right? And so I think that I guess that'll be my last word
And
on
even
this.
weirder
Maybe
is
that maybe the East-West thing is no longer even a relevant
well, then that's
question.
the weird thing too, is it's the the snake chasing its own tail because by his definition of West, started it at the cradle of civilization
Right.
in
Yeah.
Iran.
Yeah,
And here
right,
we are, the
right,
West is
exactly.
now fighting itself.
So
Hmm.
the man, it keeps
For what?
changing what the categories are or
Right.
consist of.
Yep.
Yeah.
Yep. Well, we
You
know
know.
what we don't know what it is, but we know what we know what it we recognize it when we see it,
Meanwhile, China and the East are sitting there just laughing themselves silly,
laughing their asses
apparently,
off.
because
Yep. Yep.
you know,
Yep. Because
whatever.
because we because and also because again we have such a problem with collective action. It's got to be communism. It can't be Confucianism. And we can't let them,
Um,
and we can't even let them back away from the CCP and say, we're just interested in collective action problems.
we should maybe add it to our list, but I picked this up, this Tad Stormer book.
Oh, cool.
Just came out, I think at the beginning of June, maybe. But
All
he's
right.
a historian, and he's
I liked
you
him
know
initially, but his YouTubes have gotten increasingly whiny, so I stopped watching them. But
oh I think I'm watching the shorter stuff on Instagram
okay.
usually, but the idea of a resistance history of the United States and how do you get local collective action, and how have these things fought out in America before, and what was
Hmm.
the result and why,
Yeah.
you know
Well, if he
that's
can,
like that's a good applied history right there.
absolutely, absolutely, if he can generalize from what the Wobblies did on the Iron Range to some type of way forward, that would be useful.
And how do you redo that in a social media era where
Right.
people's attention is this big?
Hmm. Yep. Yep. And a surveillance era when people, the Wobblies on the Iron Range, when they were cracked down on locally, they all fled to, well, not all of them, but many of them fled to Bemidji and kind of laid low in flop houses and brothels in Bemidji. And you can't do that anymore. So
No, that's a new thing in Minnesota, Dan. There's all this stuff about embedding uh, spies within Minnesota labor unions and
yeah,
stuff.
right, right. That was pioneered too. Yeah.
Well, when you
Agents
think about
provocateur.
the Roman Empire had to employ roughly about 17% of its population in military action to prop the state up.
Hmm.
And how expensive is it to do that now in, you know, s- surveillance capitalism
Well, we'll
times?
have we'll have we'll have
Become
flock
cheaper and
cameras and
easier.
AI to take care of it for us, so the cost will plummet. All right.
I got to
Yeah.
go.
So next
All
week,
right.
next week, prologue and chapter one of Lisa Jardine's Worldly Goods.
Okay.
Sounds good.
See you
All right.
guys.
Thank
Good
you.
to,
Take
good
care.
to see you
See ya.
again.
Good to be
Yep.
back.
Take care.